Morning, guys. Hi, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Once you come in, guys, just pop your cameras on and say hi, and then we'll get started. Good morning. Again, there's a lot of people coming through with that guest name. Hi, Tegan. The reason that that is, hey, James, is because Maya, Miku, how are you? The reason that you get that guest next to your name is if you come in off your personal email. So if you log into Zoom with your UTS email first and then join the meeting, it just comes straight through rather than me having to click and let you all in specifically. Hi guys, Erin, Abigail, Zach, Holly, Ryan, Sarah, Tione, Oscar. Can see you all. Nelly. It's actually better this way. I feel like I'm going to be able to learn your names a lot easier because you've always got it there next to your face. All right, guys. So, week 3 we're in now, and we're going to start off just as normal with a little pre-class revision quiz. So head back to that menti.com and we'll get started with that first up. Okay. All right. Everyone got a coffee ready to go for the 9 a.m. class? Actually, don't. I was running a bit late this morning and I haven't been able to get anything, so I'm just going to have to keep going with the water, but we'll be all right. Okay, so over the next couple of screens, you'll be able to put yourself in as a little avatar and then we can do this quiz. So it's going to be on levers, what we did last week. So remember, there's the 3 different types of levers. There's the first class, second class, and the third class levers, and they all have an advantage, whether that's force, distance, or perhaps it's both force and distance. We also did some movement analysis last week, so we could have a little question on that. I'll give you guys another minute just to come in here. So remember, with our levers in the body examples, the fulcrum is always at the joint, the effort is always at the muscle insertion, and then the load is normally at the distal end of the limb. All right, we're going to get started with this little pre-class quiz now. Okay, so what type of lever can produce the most powerful movements? Was it the first, second, or third class? So remember that word powerful, it's pretty much just a replacement for forceful, right? It means the same thing. So we're asking which lever has the advantage of force. It is the second class levers. So you might remember the example of the second class lever being the wheelbarrow or standing up on your tippy toes. So 2 levers where we can produce a lot of force or we can move something that's really heavy with a little effort. Okay, and what was the advantage of the third class lever? So this time it's going to be either force, distance, or both. All right, good job. It was distance. So the third class levers being the most common in the body. At the elbow joint, my bicep only contracts about 3 centimeters upwards for my fingers or the distal end of my arm to move like a good 40 centimeters through the air. So I'm producing a lot of distance at that distal end of the limb for very little distance in contraction of that bicep muscle. All right, name the lever class of knee extension. So it's either going to be first, second, or a third class lever. What are we thinking here? All right, a bit of a mixed bunch. So with a question like this, you've only got like 10 seconds to give an answer, right? So it's, you're under a lot of pressure to think, where's the fulcrum, where's the effort, where's the load, which one's in the middle, is it first, second, or third? In a case like this, where the time is going down, you need to put in something, and we're saying name the lever of knee extension, which is an example in the body. What should you have guessed? Should you have guessed 1, 2, or third class lever? Show me with your fingers, which one should we all have guessed? Yeah, should have guessed third, because third's the most common in the body, right? So it is a third class lever. So with knee extension, we've got our tibia here. So the load is going to be at the distal end of the limb. The fulcrum is going to be at the knee joint here, where the femur is going to meet with this bone. And then the effort is going to be right at this point right here, which is where the quadriceps inserts. This being the middle, so the effort is in the middle, making it a third class lever. Now, I purposely didn't tell you what the name of that landmark was, because I would have given away possibly the answer to our next question. So what is the location of the effort during knee extension? Yeah, exactly. It's the tibial tuberosity. Very good. So remember, it's the quadriceps that contract, but it's the exact point of the insertion of the quadriceps that we're interested in for the location of the effort. So that being the tibial tuberosity. Remember, tibiofemoral joint. Whenever you see joint, it's not going to be the effort. Joints are always fulcrums. So that's a good tip to help remember that one. Okay, question 5. The agonist of shoulder girdle protraction. You might remember from structural that protraction is bringing our shoulders forwards, and an example would be like punching. And remember, we said that there's a muscle called the boxer's muscle. Does anyone remember what that one is? It is the serratus anterior. So it is the serratus anterior that is the agonist of protraction. The pectoralis minor also does protraction, so it does help. It's a synergist though. And then the deltoid, now the deltoid comes from the shoulder and inserts onto the deltoid tuberosity on the humerus. Now the deltoid muscle, it crosses the glenohumeral joint, but it does not cross the shoulder girdle. So the deltoid, it has heaps of different actions at the glenohumeral joint, but it actually does absolutely nothing at the shoulder girdle. All right, last question. What type of contraction is taking place at the gluteus maximus during the lowering phase of a squat? So it's a bit of a wordy question there. You can type in the answer for this one, and we know they're asking for the type of contraction. So it's going to be either concentric, eccentric, or isometric. Those are the 3 main contraction types. So we have to wait for the timer to go down on this one, and then we'll see what everyone's written. All right, so it is an eccentric contraction. So well done to those of you who got that right. What I find with this type of a question is, because it's so wordy, like you get halfway through reading the question and you've already given up because it's just so confusing. Now, if we just break it down, we only needed to know, okay, we're asked what the type of contraction is. So we've only got 3 options. And then we see this, the lowering phase, right? So that straight away tells me I should be thinking eccentric, whether we're talking about the gluteus maximus or the quadriceps, the rectus femoris. no matter what, really, during that lowering phase, all of the muscles of the leg are going to be contracting eccentrically as we lower ourselves down. Now, I say normally because there are one or two examples where the lowering phase is not eccentric, and they will come up as we go through the semester. I'll make sure that we do those as examples at some point. So there is a trick coming, but for the most part, when you see lowering, think eccentric. Okay. So we're going to get straight into the lab. You can give yourself a mark out of 6 for how you did in that, that quiz, but we'll get straight into the lab. Now this lab, again, it does reflect the lecture that you guys have already had for this week. Give me just a thumbs up to the camera if you've already watched the lecture. It doesn't matter if you haven't, it's just so I can have an idea of how many people in the class have. Okay, so majority of us have, that's good. So if you haven't, just make sure you watch the lecture soon after this class, just to really understand what we've been talking about. So we're gonna start by looking at bone remodeling. Now, before we get into this, you guys might have seen that I started a little lockdown project, which is an Instagram page, because I'm often asked by students, current and past students, for help revising anatomy. And that's because when you guys do anatomy in first year, you don't do any anatomy in second year, pretty much. And then in third year, they expect you to know it all again. So I often have emails from students asking how they can revise. Now, I've never really had many good resources to give to them. So I decided that I would start one myself. You can check it out. It's just clem.grondu on Instagram. But I posted something on Wolf's Law yesterday. So if you've seen that already, you might already be ahead in this class. Now, Wolf's Law is how bones respond to the stress that is placed upon them. So the definition of Wolf's Law is bones respond to the stress that's placed upon them. And that can work in two different ways. There's sort of two ends of the scale. So we know that things like resistance training and putting a lot of load on our skeleton, running, hiking, just being active is going to mean that our bones are going to grow stronger and more dense across our lives. Whereas if we're very sedentary, maybe, you know, if you're an elderly person and you have a disability and you can only lie in bed all day, over time, those bones are going to become weaker and brittle. And people often think that our bones, they're just like this plastic bone inside your body, but your bones are very much alive and they're always reforming. Now, you know how skin sheds and grows back, and then they say like every however many years you have a whole new skin system, I guess. The same thing is happening at the bone level as well. Every 7 to 10 years, you have a whole new skeleton. That's the rate that the bone is being broken down and reformed. So it's constantly being broken down and reforming based on what we're doing in our lives. Are we very active? Are we doing lots of resistance training? Our bones are going to grow bigger and stronger. Are we inactive? Are we are we in a coma and in bed rest in the hospital? Our bones are going to start to break down and become weaker and more brittle. So they respond to the stress that's placed upon them. Something interesting about the bones is you can see here the tibial tuberosity. And what we see often is that at every location where a muscle inserts, it's always like a lump. Like, have you ever wondered why there's always a lump where the muscle is inserting? Now, that's not there just by chance. There's a lump at pretty much all of the muscle insertions because over your lifetime, the quadriceps are going to keep contracting and applying a stress at that exact point of the tibial tuberosity. So every time you take a step, you stand up from your chair, the quadriceps contract, they apply a load at that point of the tibial tuberosity, and eventually that's why we have a larger or a smaller lump at this point, because the quadriceps contract and apply a load there. So that's why the insertions of muscles are normally always lumps on the bone. So if you have a look at these pictures on your screen of those two x-rays, this is actually the two arms of the same person. And it's the two arms of a tennis player. And you can look and see straight away, look at the difference in the thickness of the humerus. So you can see the humerus here is really thick compared to this one here, it's a lot thinner. Now, we often see examples of Wolff's Law in sports where there's a unilateral component. Maybe there's a dominant arm, or if you're a rower and you just row to one side, anything where there's some sort of unilateral component to a sport, we tend to see this phenomenon where one arm will grow bigger and develop because it's responding to the stress, and the other arm will just stay a more normal size, I guess. So what we tend to see in tennis players is they have one really big, strong, dominant arm. So you can see here, this is Sharapova. She's got the big arm out here, and then the non-dominant arm here, and you can definitely tell the size difference. Now, the shock factor of this photo, it's definitely increased, because not only is the muscle, not only is the bone bigger on this arm here, but the muscles are also going to be bigger on this arm here as well. So that's why it looks so much bigger. So it's a combination of the bone and also the muscles. So muscles actually respond in a similar way to stress as bones do. We know if we work out our muscles, we place them under stress over time, they're going to grow bigger and stronger. If we're inactive and we're not doing any exercise or anything, our muscles are going to get smaller and weaker. So it's the same concept actually. Here's another tennis player. So you can see the difference in the forearm. Now, I know normally when I show this picture, some people have some naughty things that perhaps they want to say, but please refrain. And we're going to talk about the ballet dancer now. So you guys can type in what you think here, and we should get like a bit of a word cloud. It won't come up with your name or anything. But where do we think we're going to see an example of Wolff's Law in a ballet dancer? Think about ballet dancer. Think about where, you know, I'm sure you've all seen a picture of a ballet dancer where it looks a bit like, oh, wow, that's very bony and sticky out. You don't have to be super specific. You could just say nose, eyes, shoulder, whatever. We can see what you're thinking. Maybe it's the hip, maybe it's somewhere lower. Yeah, legs, feet, ankles, toes. Very good. You guys have got the right idea there. So definitely at those feet, there's going to be a lot of stress on them, especially if they're always standing in that point position. So I'm sure you've all seen an image like this before, where you can see the ballerina's feet. And if you look specifically at the heads of the metatarsals, which is like the knuckles of the foot, if you look at the knuckles of the foot, you can see that they're quite bony and protruding. Now, the interesting thing with ballet dancers is, whilst we see this example of this overdevelopment of the bones in the feet because of the stress that's being placed upon them standing in this position, we actually see the opposite happening at the rest of their bodies. And this is a complete generalization. So please, if there's anyone in here who is a dancer, I'm talking about the stereotype here. I'm definitely not saying that this applies to anyone or even applies at all today. But generally with ballet, the stereotype is that to be successful, they have to have these small, tiny frames. And to do that, they often restrict energy, restrict calories. They're normally malnourished. And being malnourished can have a really bad effect on bone density. So what we've seen in a lot of ballet dancers is that whilst they have, you know, this phenomenon going on in the feet, where the feet are growing, is that in the rest of their body, because they place themselves under such high training stress and they don't eat enough generally, they actually can develop osteoporosis very early on in life, because that's you know, a terrible combination for your bone health. So it's a bit of a paradox here with the ballet dancers, but definitely doesn't apply to all. I'm just talking about the stereotype. Okay, the next one is the weightlifter. Now, where are we thinking the weightlifter is going to have some example of Wolff's Law? This is actually a bit of a harder one, because like weightlifter, like what do you mean? Like what type of a weightlifter? But just generally, where are we thinking the bones will be bigger and stronger in a weightlifter compared to, you know, just normal population? Yeah, good. So you guys are picking out like the big areas of the body, the knees, The legs, the large bony landmark, yeah, they're going to have big protruding landmarks. The spine as well. It's pretty much the whole body for the weightlifters, pretty much all over. They're going to have this increase in bone density. And actually, weightlifters are notorious for having very good bone density. And that's especially if they start resistance training or weightlifting in their mid to late teens, early 20s. And if you guys are doing health and lifespan development with me this semester, this is actually something we're going to talk about soon. And you actually reach a level of peak bone density in your life at around mid to late 20s. So in your mid to late 20s, which might be some of us here, you reach this level of peak bone density. And from this point, no matter what you do in the 30s, the 40s, and so on, you're pretty much just going to have a steady decline in your bone density across your lifespan. Now, if we can increase this level by starting resistance training in our teens and early 20s, we can lift that level of peak bone density, and that will help to mitigate some of the loss. So instead of being down here when we reach our 50s, we're up here. So it's still going to be a decline over time, but by increasing that level of the peak bone density in that 20s age range, we can really help to reduce our risk of osteoporosis and fractures as we get on in later life. So resistance training is very important for bone density. All right, now the astronaut. So what are we thinking is going to happen to the astronaut? Now, perhaps it's not a specific body part, but maybe just something that we're going to see all over. So what's going to happen when we take away gravity and we go up into space? Exactly, lower bone density. Their bone density is definitely going to decrease. Atrophy is a good one as well. Normally, atrophy refers to the lower muscle mass. So that's definitely going to be happening to them as well. And in terms of the bone density in Wolff's Law, it's definitely going to be decreasing. Now, sitting here right now, me, all of you guys, we are all under some sort of stress from gravity. Our bones are all under some sort of load. Even doing nothing, they're under a tiny bit of load from gravity, just pushing us down and keeping us stuck to the ground. It's not much, but it's more than what they're getting up in space, right? In this zero gravity sort of situation. When you're up in space, we've seen that the astronauts, they tend to lose about 1% of their bone density per week. 1% per week, that's massive bone loss. And compare that to elderly people. So once we get into like 70s, you lose about 1% of bone mass per year. So an older person is losing 1% of bone mass per year. Compare that with the astronaut, 1% per week. So often with these astronauts, when they come back down to Earth, they've got lifelong issues with the bone density. Like it's a real problem for these people that go up into space. I don't know how, but I have a friend of a friend of a friend, you know, one of those people who's one of those people who you know, but you have no idea who they are, who is the strength and conditioning coach for the astronauts at NASA, which is just like the coolest job ever. I would definitely want that job. Anyway, so what they do when they're in space is they have these sorts of contraptions that are, you know, somewhat engineered to be able to apply resistance, and they can do some sort of exercises up there. Now, this won't completely fix the bone loss that they're going to have, but it might reduce it a little bit. So instead of losing 1% per week, perhaps with enough playing around on these contraptions, they can decrease that to 1% per fortnight or something like that. So it's still a massive, massive loss in bone density. All right. The next one is the martial artist. So is anyone in here involved in like a kickboxing sport? Kickboxing? There's normally 1 or 2 people every year who are not in this class. That's all right. So martial artists, think specifically to with kickboxing. Where would we see the increase in the bone density? If they're kicking stuff all the time, what bone are we thinking they're gonna want to be big and strong? Yeah. Good. So tibia, which is the shin bone, exactly the femur as well, the whole leg, right? But specifically, there's actually a thing that they do in these Muay Thai, kickboxing type sports called shin conditioning. Has anyone heard of shin conditioning before? Yeah, a couple of you have. So it's horrendous what they do in these sports. Basically, they use some sort of a stick or some sort of a stress, and they bash the tibia in order for it to grow back bigger and stronger. So I've got a video of it here. I need to share my sound with you guys. Make sure your sound's turned up, because the sound is like the integral part of this video.
This is good. All right.
Everyone hear that? Put your thumb up if you heard it. Yeah, okay, cool.
That's
I'll just crack them both real quick.
Ready? Conditioning for Jason's legs, brought to you by MKA Sports. Nice. Let's get a facial expression.
He's got some control, dude. I'm usually screaming by now. Dude,
all right, this is the best part.
I told you, second day is the worst. 6 days, no fun either.
Are we doing rolling now?
Ready?
There it goes. Oh! Oh my gosh.
Don't move, don't move. There you go.
Do your shins feel stronger now? I'm just curious. Are your shins stronger now, Jason?
Yeah, they're much stronger.
Let me see you kick the bag with your shin.
Fuck. I'll go cry on the bag with my shins. Oh.
Anyway, you guys get the idea there. So without knowing it, really, that's a perfect example of Wolff's Law. The idea is they're applying this stress to the tibia in the hopes that it'll become bigger and stronger, so when they kick people, it's going to hurt more. All right, so these pictures on the screen now reflect the pictures in your lab book. Just pop the dot on the screen of the image that's showing the osteoporotic bone. So you should be able to like tap the screen and a little pin will drop. It is the picture on the right-hand side. So the right-hand side of your book, the right-hand side of the screen. So this one here. That word osteoporotic, if we break it down, osteo meaning bone and porotic or porosis meaning porous. So like it's a bone with holes in it. So this would be our example of our osteoporotic bone. So this is what the astronaut's bone looks like before they go up into space. And then when they come back down, that's what it looks like there. After having no stress applied to it for a longer period of time, we become porous and put ourselves at risk of osteoporosis. All right, so now over the page, we have to do some drawings of the different loading models that our bones are placed on. So Lee spoke about these in the lecture. So what we're going to do now is just draw the pictures together. We'll briefly discuss what each of these is. And whilst we're doing that, I want you guys to think about it. You don't have to talk and say it to me, but have a think in your head of, with gravity right now, I said that we're all under some sort of loading because of gravity pushing us down to the earth. I want you to have a think about which one of these loading modes is best represented by gravity keeping us on the earth. Okay, so the first one is tension. Now, a tension loading is when we're pulling the bone apart. So I'm going to pull this bone apart. So I'm going to draw a picture that looks something like this. This could be my bone here. And then I'm going to have two arrows signifying the pulling apart of that bone. So tension, it's two opposite forces pulling apart. Compression is the same, two opposite forces, but now they're pushing that bone together. So we've gone from pulling it apart to pushing it together. And we can draw the bone for compression maybe a bit shorter and fatter to signify that we've pushed it together. Okay, and then we have shear. Now, shear was two forces coming from opposite directions on that horizontal plane. So it would look something like this. We have my bone, and then I've got one force like so, and the other force coming from the opposite direction, but both on that horizontal. Now, people often get a bit confused with the difference between shear and torsion. Now, the key to remember torsion is that torsion is twisting. So T for torsion, T for twisting. Write that down somewhere. It'll help you remember the difference because those two do get a little bit confused. So there, we can draw our torsion like that. Like I'm going to take this bone and wring it out like I was wringing out a towel. Okay, and then we've just got bending. Now there's two different types of bending. There's 3-point bending and 4-point bending. So let's draw on here. We can do 3-point bending first. So there's the bone. We're going to have two forces coming from the same direction here, and then one coming from the opposite, like so. For 3-point bending, and then 4-point bending is going to be 2 and 2. So two forces coming from the same, and then another two. So again, make sure you've watched the lecture and re-go over this if you haven't seen it yet. So these are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different loading modes that our bones are under. Now, I said before, if we think about what the loading mode our bones are under from the force of gravity, what would we be thinking there? I'm going to let you guys say either 1 for tension, 2 for compression, or 3 for shear. What are we thinking? 2, exactly. So gravity is a compressive force that our skeleton is under pretty much 24/7 whilst we're on Earth. Now that makes it not surprising that our bones are strongest in compression type forces. 1 second, I've lost there we go. Okay, so our bones are strongest under compression. Remember, bones respond to the stress placed upon them, so it's no surprise that our bones are strongest under compression because we're under compression forces pretty much all day long. So if I wanted to break this bone, compressing it downwards would not be the best way to go about it. This bone can withstand 190 megapascals of force before it will break. Now that term megapascals, it's just a measure of a unit of measurement of what they, use when they measure these bone biomechanics. You don't need to know what the megapascals is. Just think about it as a number of representing force. I don't even know what megapascals means, to be honest. So I was just saying that to preempt any of you asking me what megapascals means. All right, tension. So tension is 130 megapascals. So if I wanted to break this bone, I'd have a better chance of being able to pull it apart than I would if I tried to push it together. And then shear can only, our bones can only withstand 70 megapascals within these shear forces. So if you wanted to break a bone for some reason, your best bet would be doing it under some sort of a shear load. Now, as Lee said in the lecture, because of the composition of our bones, we're actually under a combination of all 3 different types of these loads 24/7, mostly under compression because of gravity though. And if we have a think about some examples of perhaps exercises where our bones would be placed more under compression versus tension and so on, that might help give us a better understanding of these different loading models. So compression, I'm thinking of an exercise that is putting a high compressive load on my arms, so my humerus, my radius, and my ulna. If you feel free to talk if you want to, can you think of an exercise that would put high compressive loads on the bones of your arm? It's a hard one, right? I'll give you a minute to think about it, but the one that I was thinking of was a push-up or holding yourself on a plank. That would mean that my body weight wanted to go down, placing that compressive force on the bones of my arm. So that would be a great example of placing high compressive loads on the arm. If we think about tension, there's another example for tension on the bones of the arm. We actually did it as a movement analysis last week. Zach, did you want to say what that exercise was?
Pull-up.
Yeah,
Pull-up.
it was the pull-up, exactly. The pull-up places high tensile loads on the arm. So I've got my arm outstretched, I'm hanging from the bar. The arm is being like pulled apart by gravity, bringing us down. And then for shear is a bit of a harder one to think of an example for. But if we do think back to last week and what we did in the movement analysis, the leg extension is actually a good example of a shear force being placed on the tibia here. So in this example, you're sitting on the chair, you have the bar pad at the bottom of your shin bone here, at the bottom of the tibia, and you're going to extend your knee upwards with the weight. So the bar pad here is the resistance. This is one force that's going downwards. So we're resisting against that force as we lift it upwards. And then the other force is going to be coming from our quadriceps, which are inserting into that tibial tuberosity here. They're going to be contracting, producing an upwards force to lift that leg up. So there we have the two forces going in the opposing directions during knee extension. I saw that, Nelly. Don't worry, it's good. We had a in class last night, someone's dad decided they wanted to be very embarrassing and kept coming in the background and dancing for all of us. So the girl was very embarrassed, but everyone else loved it. Okay, so over the page, we've got some pictures of different fractures, and we're going to say what type of loading mode was the cause of these fractures, I guess. So you can see here the vertebrae from the sagittal view. We're looking at the body here. The body looks like it's being crushed almost. We can see that the spinous process is out the back there on the posterior side. So you're all guessing compression, which is correct. Good job. It is a compression fracture. That's what we see most of the time at the fractures in the vertebral column. All right, the next one here, we're looking at the foot, and we can see at the back there, like the top of the calcaneus looks like it's being pulled off. So what's likely happened here is that there's been a big contraction at your calf muscles, your gastrocnemius, and that's caused a lot of stress through the Achilles tendon, which inserts onto the back of the calcaneus, and that contraction has just ripped off the back of that calcaneus bone, and it is a tension fracture. Very, very good. All right, the next one here, the arrows might give it away, but this is an example of that ski boot fracture that Lee spoke about in the lecture. So it is a 3-point bending fracture, and we're going to come back to this fracture soon enough. I'll just get us to do the last example on this page, and we're going to come back to that one. So this one here, we're looking at the tibia. I can see the head of the condyles of the femur above it. I can see the fibula next to the tibia as well. Now, don't let the two arrows fool you in this example. Most people saying shear. Now, shear, it does look like a shear fracture. I look at those arrows and I say, yeah, shear straight away, because those are the arrows that we drew for our shear model. However, this is torsion. Now, the way that I know that this is torsion is because see that diagonal fracture through the bone? Whenever you see a fracture that's on the diagonal, it's normally through some sort of twisting or torsion issue. So this is a classic torsion fracture. I know it by looking at that diagonal crack through the bone there. All right, so I said we were going to come back to the ski boot. Now, the ski boot fracture was the example of the 3-point bending, and over the page you guys are asked to explain how muscle activity can influence some abnormal bone loadings. Now, when I look at these pictures with all these arrows everywhere, there's arrows up and down, there's angles going on, these pictures look extremely confusing. Like if someone showed this to me, I could not tell you what was going on at these pictures. But the concept is actually very basic. So even the question on question number 4 sounds confusing, but it's a very simple concept. So this is my tibia, right? I've got the ski boot, which would be sort of level right about here where my hand is. Now, if I'm skiing and I'm falling forwards, all of a sudden that tibia is having a lot of stress applied to it from that front of the ski boot here. Now, my body knows that this is too much stress on the front of the tibia. Something's about to break. There's signals going on within the body that tell me that. So as a reflex almost, the gastrocnemius and the soleus behind here are going to contract to pull that tibia back up into a better position. It's what you do normally. If say you had your hand out like this and your friend came along and they were really a mean friend and they wanted to break your wrist and they just grabbed your wrist and bent it backwards, what you're going to do is contract your muscles to stop them from bending it backwards, right? Because you don't want your wrist to break. It's the exact same example happening here. So the tibia is coming forward, there's too much stress on it, it's about to break. The muscles are going to contract and neutralize that stress. They're going to put the handbrake on that bone breaking. Sometimes they're not going to be able to stop the bone breaking because perhaps the muscle can't contract forcefully enough to save you from that position. But for the most part, a lot of the time, if you're in a compromised position or if you're in a position where things aren't going well and bones about to break or you're about to have an injury, your muscles are going to contract and try and save you and pull you out of that position. So we see the same thing for this femoral head picture here. So you can see the femoral head. There's some sort of abnormal loading going on at the femoral neck. So the neck, which is the skinny part. And you can see that muscle that represents the gluteus medius, and that's going to contract and help to neutralize that stress that was on the femoral head. So like I said, it's a reflex. You don't even need to think about doing this. Your body just does it for you. All right, now synovial joints. So this little section is a bit of revision on synovial joints from structural anatomy. I'm going to give you guys just a moment to label that picture in your lab book, and you can see it on the screen there. And then we're going to talk about some of the roles of these different features of the synovial joints. All right, so it looks like most of you are done writing there. Now, we know that we've got 3 different types of joints in the body: synovial, fibrous, and cartilaginous. So that was heavy in structural anatomy. The cartilaginous joints were 2 bones joined by just cartilage. The fibrous joints were 2 bones joined by just fibers. And we know that with the synovial joints, they included fibers, they included cartilage, they had synovial fluid. There's a lot more going on at these synovial joints. So these are all the different features. Now, the first one is the articular cartilage. Now, articular cartilage is just the fancy name for the cartilage that's on the ends of the long bones. So we learned in structural that there's hyaline cartilage on the ends of the long bones, and the correct name for that is the articular cartilage. Now, the articular cartilage, it provides like a smooth, lubricated surface for those joints to move, and helps to decrease friction within that joint. So it's very important for decreasing the friction within the joint. And it also helps to distribute the load within the joint. Now write that down, distributes load, and put like an asterisk next to it, because we haven't really covered that before, but I want to make sure you've got it written there. But Lee's going to be talking a lot about the loading properties of articular cartilage in a coming lecture. So write that down, asterisk it, and then we'll come back to that once we've learnt about that topic. All right, the articular capsule. Now, the articular capsule holds the joint together. It seals the joint, keeps the bones together, keeps all like the goodies inside, keeps the synovial fluid in there. And it does also help to provide some stability to the joint by limiting the movement going on. But the two key points for the articular capsule is seals the joint, provides stability. Okay, and then we have the synovial fluid. Now, synovial fluid, let me backtrack. The articular cartilage, it's actually avascular. So that's something very important about articular cartilage. And what that means is that there's no blood supply going to this articular cartilage. And we know that blood in the body is very important for transporting nutrients and waste around. You know, it transports oxygen and all other nutrients to the cell, and it gets rid of the carbon dioxide and the waste products. Now, in place of the blood, which is not going to the articular cartilage, it's the synovial fluid that does that job. So the synovial fluid is transporting nutrients and waste to the cartilage. It's transporting oxygen, it's getting rid of the carbon dioxide. It sort of acts as the replacement for blood within the synovial joints. It does also play a role in decreasing the friction within the joint by lubricating the surfaces. So by having the fluid in there, it's a nice frictionless environment. And it also does play a role in shock absorption. Now I want you to star shock absorption again. So again, we'll learn about the shock absorption properties within the joints when we do talk about that load distribution as well at the articular cartilage. So that's coming up. Okay, so that was really three key points for the synovial fluid. We should have nutrient and waste transportation, including oxygen and carbon dioxide. We should have decreasing friction, like lubricating the joint, and we should also have shock absorption. And then the last one is the synovial membrane. So hopefully, or you should probably guess what the synovial membrane does because it is written on that picture. The function of it is to secrete the synovial fluid. All right, now we are up to the movement analysis. So I'm going to send you guys a link. We're going to try something a little different today than what we did last week. And I did this all yesterday and it worked really well. So we've got this link to this Padlet where basically on this website, you can upload pictures and documents for me to see. Now, when I am in class and face-to-face, when we're doing the movement analysis, normally you're working in a small group. I can walk around, see how you guys are going. If you're struggling, I can give you some more help. If you're doing really well, I can give some extension questions. But being online, I've already found it's very hard to figure out how each individual one of you is going and give you individual feedback. So this is sort of my way around that. So what I've got on here so far is an upload for the back squat. So if you click on that, it's just the empty version of your lab book. Same for the deadlift and so on. Now, if you're writing in your book, oh shit, I would suggest just using your computer for this. And if you download this picture here on whatever like app that your computer uses to look at pictures, there should also be a function to draw on it or to type on the picture as well. Now, if you don't have the ability to do that, just let me know and we can try and troubleshoot it. Some people yesterday, rather than filling it out on the computer, what they did was they wrote it in their lab books and then took their phone and took a picture and then went to the link on and then uploaded the picture via their phone. So that worked as well if you're someone who wants to write it out. But this is what we're going to do. So before we begin, we're actually going to do the tricep extension first. So the reason why I haven't uploaded anything for the tricep extension is because I want us to do that one together, because it's one that some people have been having some troubles with yesterday. So we're going to come back to this page. We'll just do the tricep extension first. So flick over to that tricep one. Okay, all right, so now I should be able to write on this. Okay, so with this, the elbow has been quite simple. It's the radiocarpal joint that's a little bit confusing. So let's first have a look at the little blurb. The participant grasps the dumbbell behind their head and begins to fully extend the elbow until the arm and the forearm are straight. An assumption is made that no movement occurs at the glenohumeral joint or the shoulder girdle, and the wrist remains in slight extension throughout this exercise. So if the wrist is remaining in some sort of position, we already know that at the wrist joint, it's going to be isometric. So let's put in isometric for our contraction types. Okay, and then we have the elbow. So the lifting phase, we should be thinking concentric, and the lowering phase, eccentric. If you're doing a tricep extension overhead, the hard part is to lift the weight up, and then it's easier to lower it back down, right? So lifting the weight up is going to be our concentric phase, and lowering the weight down will be our eccentric phase. Okay, now let's look at the joint actions. So we're told here the wrist remains in slight extension, so we can already put in extension. And then at the elbow now, so you're grabbing the dumbbell behind your head and then you begin to fully extend the elbow. So it's pretty much told to us in the question, but if we're holding the dumbbell behind our head and we straighten the arm upwards, our arm is going from bent to straight, so it is extending. So in that phase one, as we lift the weight up, the joint action will be extension. And then as we lower the weight back down, the elbow is now bending, so it is flexion. Okay, then we can do the muscle group. So for the concentric phase, we know that the muscle group is the same as the joint action. So this must be the elbow extensors. And the agonist of elbow extension is the triceps brachii. We can then do the same for phase two at the elbow. So eccentric means that the muscle group must be the opposite. So if it's elbow flexion, the muscle group is going to be the elbow extensors. And the agonist, again, triceps brachii. Okay, and then at the radiocarpal joint, now this is where the tricky part is, because it's isometric, and isometric, we know that there's no rule that we can follow. So we need to think about where the weight is, where's gravity pushing it down, what muscles are we using to hold the weight in this isometric position. So let's pretend the weight is the water bottle. I'm going to hold the water bottle in a slightly extended position at the wrist joint. Now, gravity tells me that this water bottle wants to go down to the ground, right? I'm holding it here, but the water bottle wants to drop down. So to hold the weight in this position, it's not the extensors that are working, it's actually the wrist flexors here that are contracting to hold that weight into that position. So this is actually an example of where we see an isometric contraction and the muscle group being the opposite of the joint action. So it's actually these wrist flexors that are going to hold this weight up against gravity, even though the wrist remains in a slightly extended position. So it will be the radiocarpal flexors. And then there's 3 agonists of radiocarpal flexion, being the flexor carpi radialis, flexor carpi ulnaris, flexor digitorum superficialis. And then I know here, radiocarpal flexors, it's going to be the same as above. So I'll just write as above, so I know. So there is the tricep extension. Now, say that you've just done this on your computer. What I'm going to do now is take a screenshot of this filled out movement analysis. So I've taken that photo. I'm going to now share back the Mentimeter screen and show you how you can upload it. So, okay, so then, can you guys see that Mentimeter screen? Yeah, cool. All right, so then to upload your tricep extension, I just press the plus here, and then this little pop-up comes, and then to add a document, I'll just press this upload button. And then I'm going to grab that screenshot of the filled out tricep extension. As that loads, in the subject, write your name. If you don't want to write your name and you want to be anonymous, that's fine. But for me to be able to give you feedback, it helps if you write your name. And then you just hit publish and it'll show up there under the tricep extension. Now, we've done the tricep extension, so none of you need to upload anything else under here. So I want you guys to work on the 3 others, the back squat, the deadlift, and the leg press. And I'm actually going to assign you all a different movement analysis now, just so that we don't all start on the same thing. So Tegan, James, Maya, Miku, Erin, Abigail, and Zach, you can start on the back squat. Holly, Tion, Oscar, Madeline, Shay, Nicola, and Rebecca, you can start on the deadlift. And then everyone else who I haven't pulled out, you guys can all start on the leg press. So have a go at that. I'm happy for you guys to turn your cameras off. Just try and relax whilst you're doing it. If you are going to have any trouble doing this exercise, just let me know. I can talk to you and we can try and figure out a way around it. If not, yeah, hopefully it works well. I think all the other classes didn't have a problem, so hopefully it goes well today as well. So check your cameras off and work away, and I'll start giving you feedback as they come up. Maya, your back squat was perfect. Very well done. Good job. Sarah, same to you on the leg press. Perfect. So once you've done that one that I assigned to you, just keep moving through the rest. Try and have a go at them without looking at the ones that I said are done perfectly. You can use them to mark yourself if you'd like to do that. Tegan, I just saw your back squat again. Very well done. All correct. And Gabby, same to you for the leg press. Well done. Okay, Miku and Abby, well done as well. We've had no mistakes so far in anything anyone's uploaded. That's definitely a record. And same to the person who just uploaded the picture of on the leg press. Perfect as well. We need a deadlift to come up. So if you're working on the deadlift, pop that up and then we can have a look at that, because we won't leave today until we've got an example for the correct answers for each of these 4 up here. Indy, I just saw your leg press, perfect. And same to you, Ellen, as well. All right. Okay, Beck, I just had a look at your deadlift. So your first 3 columns are perfect: the joint action, the contraction type, and the muscle group, 100%. I just want you to go over the agonists in the back of the lab book. Now, if anyone here is struggling a little bit remembering all the agonists and things like that, that's fine. At this stage, I just want you to get the process right. So at this stage, to me, I'm looking for the first 3 columns being correct. I don't mind if you leave the agonist column blank if you're not confident at those right now. So feel free to avoid doing those until you've had some more time to get more confident at it. The idea for week 3 is just to understand the process and be confident following the rules. All right, so there's no name to it, but the deadlift one that just came up, again, first 3 columns, perfect. Your agonists are good for the hip and for the tibiofemoral joint. It's just for the trunk. So have a think again about which muscles are the trunk extensors. Okay, Felipe, your leg press is great. And Sarah, there we go. That's the deadlift. Well done. That's 100% for that one. Good job. Now, now that we've got a correct answer for each of the 4 different movement analysis, they're the ones with the love hearts next to them. If you want to quickly, jot them down somewhere or take a screenshot and then, use that to refer back and be able to test yourself and make sure you've got the right responses in your lab book, you can go for that. There's one last thing I just want to explain before we go. So if you'll just come back to look at my face now. I just want to explain this one last thing. So it's something that some people tend to struggle with the movement analysis. So hopefully this helps some of you if you've been thinking about it. So at my elbow right now, my elbow is flexed, right? So my elbow is flexed in this position. Now here, my elbow is also flexed. But to go from this position to this position, my elbow has extended. So the joint action is extension, even though the starting point is flexion and really the finishing point, the elbow's flexed, the joint action was extension. So the elbow's extending there. So that's hopefully, you know, if one of you has been thinking like that, hopefully that helps a little bit. Other than that, now we've got the final options for each of these 4 movement analysis. You are welcome to go. I'll see you guys next week. But if you have any questions, you want to go through any more, you want me to give you an extension question, just stick around. There's still like 45 minutes left of the class, so you can have an early break. But I'm here to help out if anyone wants to go over anything else with me. Thanks for coming, guys, and I hope that you found this using the Padlet all right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey Clem, I just
Hi.
had a question.
Yes.
With the back squat, like I'm just trying to wrap my head around like the lowering and lifting phase.
Yeah.
So here I've written like I got the hip extensors for the lowering phase,
Yeah.
the muscle group for the hip, but I don't understand how like in the lifting phase it's also the hip extensors, because like in my mind when you're like squatting up and like standing up, you're like flexing like, you know, all your lower muscles and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So this is I'm glad that you stayed and asked me, because this is what you're struggling with right now is very common. A lot of people will be thinking this way. It's just no one wants to ask yet. So I'm glad that you've stayed. Now, you're confusing flexion of the joint with flexion of the muscle. The muscle shortening is what you're saying is flexing, right? So the muscle is shortening.
Yeah.
Now, that's different to the joint action. So the joint action flexion and extension is different from the muscle flexing, I guess. So
yeah, okay.
I like to think of it as you know, when you said when you stand up, you're flexing your muscles.
Yeah.
Replace that word with contracting when you're talking about the muscles. So when you stand up, your muscles are contracting, they're shortening. So they're contracting concentrically, which is what you've got when you're standing up, a concentric contraction. But the hip joint is actually extending. So the hip joint is going from bent in the bottom of the squat to like a straight leg. So the hip joint has extended.
Okay. Yeah.
And the muscles have contracted.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll think of it as like when you're like squatting down, like the hip joints like kind of flexing, like going like really small together. And then when you're standing up, it's like stretching. Yeah.
Exactly. So if you think about the joint as it's just confusing you the terms flexion and extension at the joint. So just remember, flexion of the hip is the hip comes forwards, so the joint it's hard to, I can't show you on here, sorry, but the angle is decreasing. So when you're standing up, the angle at the hip, it's like 180 degrees, it's straight, right?
Yeah.
But when you're flexing, it's changing, it's now 90. So say you sat in the bottom of the squat at 90 degrees, this is your back and this is your leg and knee.
Yeah.
And you're in the bottom of the squat here and you stand up.
Oh yeah, no, that's a good way to think about it, definitely.
All right, good. If you have any more like issues with that, just let me know. And that's
perfect.
It's sort of the reason why, like last week I was saying, try not to think about concentric and eccentric as shortening and lengthening.
Yeah.
Then you tend to think, well, the muscle's flexing, so the joint action's got to be flexion.
Yeah,
But
and that's what I'm struggling with. Yeah.
yeah, so just try and separate those two things. Try and separate the joint action from what the muscles are doing. So if just look at the joint, is the joint angle increasing or decreasing? There's your joint action.
Yeah.
And then you know that like when you squat, it's your quads and your glutes that are working mostly, right? So if you finish this table and you had the iliopsoas, which is the hip flexor, and the hamstrings written there, you'd think something's wrong, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes it helps to also, once you've completed it, to think logically, okay, so the muscles that are working here are glutes, rectus femoris, the three vastus muscles. Yeah, that makes sense for a squat.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Perfect.
Okay. Good luck.
Thank you very much. I also followed your Instagram page as well. I
Oh,
saw
did
it.
you?
Yeah, no, it's good.
I hope it helps some people.
Yeah, definitely. No, it looks good. It's like a good recap kind of thing.
Have to do some more posts on there.
Anyways, have a good rest of your day. Thank you for your help.
You too. I'll see you next week.
See you then. Bye bye.
Bye.